While India's GDP is growing at its slowest pace in the last 39 months, the industrial production data points to more worries. All of this was part of the report card that was presented by the Chief Economic Advisor, Arvind Subramanian, to the Prime Minister last week. And so in a bid to lift the economy, the government is weighing the need for a stimulus package. But it's not as easy as it sounds. Top government officials have ruled out any expenditure cuts, which means that there is pressure on the fisc. Also, the centre is mindful of fiscal headwinds, and there is concern in the corridors of power over non-tax revenues specifically. Now, this has been exacerbated by lower RBI dividend, as well as the fact that spectrum receipts have not been as robust as the government had hoped for. The government, though, is not too perturbed about tax collection targets. They believe that they'll be able to achieve tax targets, but the current slowdown, they attribute that mainly to the transition to the GST, as well as some of the pain that was associated or left over from demonetization, as well as the stress on the system from the bad loan problem. Here, the government hopes that a resolution of one or two of the big bad loan cases will bring confidence back to the system. There is going to be a series of high-level meetings over the next 2 weeks to assess the state of the economy and weigh the options before the government. In this backdrop, former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has issued another warning. He believes that demonetization and what he calls a hurried rollout of the GST have the potential to hurt growth even further.
Both demonetization and the GST have had some impact. Both would affect the informal sector, the small-scale sector, and that factors today is responsible for GDP of 40%. 90% of our employment is in the informal sector. And the withdrawal of 86% of currency, plus also the GST, because it has been put in practice in haste, there are a lot of glitches which are now coming out. These are bound to affect the GDP growth adversely.
Well, that is the former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh warning of a further hit to GDP growth, and the signs are worrying. Prashant Nair is standing by now to explain how investments have seen pretty much no growth in the last 2 financial years. Prashant, take us through the investment figure, because now the effort on part of the government is to see what they can do to revive private sector investment.
I think the single best metric to track animal spirits in the economy, whether people want to invest in the economy, is new project announcements, both from the public sector and the private sector. I mean, of course, you would track private sector more closely for obvious reasons. So I dug into the CMI data, and let's put the data out, the hard facts as they stand. And I limited myself to the financial year ended 17. That is the last full year available data that we actually have. What we found is that there was absolutely no growth in financial year 17 over financial year 16. So if you look at the financial year 17 data, you will find that it is still about 60% higher than financial year 13 data. I'm comparing 17 to 13 because FY13 is the last financial year before the new government, the NDA government, took charge. You look at investment announcements in financial year 17 and compare it to FY09, which was essentially when the bull market really ended. Bull market for stock markets and infrastructure ended, and you find that FY17 is down by 63% as compared to 09. Okay, this is, I mean, the bulk of the findings, but let's look at the data, and I think these numbers make it absolutely clear. Take a look at this. If you look at 17 and 16, they're absolutely flat. You go back to FY15 and FY14, you find that there was basically some growth. In 14, there was growth over financial year 13. In FY15, there was growth over FY14. The reason is very simple, and the reason is that in FY13, there was already anticipation starting to build in that Mr. Modi is going to come to power, and the subsequent year, when he actually did come to power, there was a big spike in new project announcements. You go back 4 years before that, and you find that new project announcements had actually been falling all the way from the time of the global financial crisis. So this is essentially a story of almost 3 halves. One half, the impact of GFC, the global financial crisis, which peaked in 2008, 2007, 2008. After that, you had this period of falling investments new project announcements continued to fall. There was a 2-year period in anticipation of the new government coming in when this number started to pick up. And after that, it's basically been down or been absolutely flat. Back to you.
All right, Prashant, thanks very much. So as Prashant was pointing out, the CMIE data paints a picture that is worrisome. But the government's own data goes a little easier on that. In 2014, the year Prime Minister Modi took charge, over 4 lakh crore rupees worth of investments were promised. The next year, this number dropped to just over 3 lakh crore rupees. But in 2016, total investments pledged rose back above the 4 lakh crore rupee mark. Now, here's a more interesting tidbit. In 2014, while 4 lakh crore rupees was promised, only 78,000 crores in investment were realized. But in 2016, the amount of investments realized has crossed 1 lakh crore rupees. Data from the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, the DIPP, suggests that even in the first 6 months of 2017, the investment picture is not looking too bleak. But what is clear is that private capex is not picking up. Earlier, we showed you a warning of sorts from former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. Now, here's a person closer to the government, and even he has a warning. Subramanian Swamy, BJP MP to Rajya Sabha, spoke with Veer Sanghvi and warned of a major depression unless the right steps are taken to revive the economy. Swamy added that he in fact wrote a letter to the Prime Minister elaborating his concerns.
Last May, on 9th May to be exact, I wrote the PM a 16-page letter with statistics from his own departments to show that there are 5 storm signals, and the growth rate, if it's calculated according to what I said to him, what he might have thought it pompous, that there's a Samuelson-Swamy theory of index numbers, which tells you how to calculate the correct index numbers. Yeah. I said the growth rate is lower than what is being told to you, and that it is going to decline. Now,
this is how many months ago?
May.
May, okay, all right.
Earlier on, I'd been sending him on ad hoc issues, but this one was a comprehensive analysis, and I kept it confidential. I did not publicize it. And I'm saying today that the economy is in a tailspin.
Really? You'll go that far? You use the word tailspin?
Yeah, it can crash. So we need to do a lot of good things and to revive the economy.
When you say in a tailspin, you mean what? We're not going to look at a revival of the rate of growth?
No, you can. Even a tailspin can be made to steady, and depends on the...
But if nothing is done, where are we headed?
We are heading for basically a major depression.
Not even recession, you're using the word depression.
No, depression. There'll be mass scale. Banks might collapse, for example. Factories might start closing. That sort of thing. I'm not saying it's that bad.
You're saying it could.
If you don't do anything,
so what should they do? So what should they do?
I think right now the most important thing to do is to enthuse the public. There is a deep disappointment because they're piling taxes. Even today, the latest on the petrol thing, and that's not small amount, 8 rupees extra. I think I go to my suggestion that whatever you do, you must see, the public must see immediate change. Not that it's going to filter down. We have done it. You will produce results. I think the first thing we should do is abolish income tax.
Well, that's been a long-standing demand there, Subramanian Swamy, abolishing income tax. But the warning there from the BJP Rajya Sabha MP is pretty dire. He's not talking recession. He says he expects a depression unless there is urgent intervention. But let's revert back to the problem of India's sectors, manufacturing sectors. In fact, let's talk about utilization rates now. If you look at the top automakers, they're sitting on over 50% idle capacity. But is this an isolated case? Ekta standing by now with the Reserve Bank of India's data that does point to an improvement in capacity utilization across corporate India. Ekta, this data, of course, is before the GST rollout, so it may look very different now. While there has been an improvement in capacity utilization, it's still in the 70s.
Yes, absolutely. So you haven't seen a drastic improvement. Just to put it into perspective, most of the economists work with, say, an 80% figure or plus for private capex to come back into the system. But if you are talking about capacity utilization at this point in time, based on data ending Q4 of FY17 for the previous fiscal, we had gone back to capacity utilization back to the 74.1% figure, and that would be similar to what we saw in Q4 of FY16, same time last year, and would be an improvement of around 200 basis points on a sequential basis. Now, just to give you further data, it is basically talking about new orders rising, any new order procurement that we've seen in the quarter gone by. So if you look at it on a sequential basis, yes, we are aided by what would be a low base impact also, because there was a decline of 4.7% on a sequential basis for Q3 of FY17. But if you look at Q4, there's a huge and steep jump to above 26% in terms of new orders rising. To corroborate it, if you even look at it on a year-on-year basis, the 12.3% for Q4 of FY17 compares to around 4.9% in the same time last year. So it seems as though there has been some sort of improvement in terms of new orders rising, but economists believe the capacity utilization figure would be the most accurate figure to go by. Now, non-food bank credit, we all know that credit growth has been slowing considerably. If you look at 2017, Feb stood at around 3.3%. It improved to 4.1% in the month of May. And as of July, we don't have data for August, it came in at around 5.3% as per the RBI. Now, credit to industry. There's credit to agri, there's credit to industry, and within industry, it's broken up into infrastructure, textiles, etc. You can see that the declining trend is quite obvious. So we started the year at around a decline of 5.2%, and currently it's absolutely flat on a year-on-year basis for the month of July. That's as much data as we have at this point in time. So maybe there are some amount of green shoots, but we'll have to wait and see if there would eventually be a low base impact which would benefit as well.
All right, thanks Ekta and Prashant for joining us on today's Editors Roundtable. We will wrap this up right here, but remember, we will continue to keep you updated on the measures that the government intends to take forward to try and stimulate the economy.